I was talking about taxes and income with respect to Bitcoin, but also might as well mention that my father, who lost his most recent appeal based on horrific and obvious error in his trial, has filed another appeal on his own. He has basically fired his attorneys, and he has filed an appeal on his own. I really don't think it really would have mattered. I mean, had he allowed the attorneys to file another appeal, I mean, he's just going to lose. Not because he doesn't have merits to his claim, he does, but because the government doesn't want him to win. And, if you're a political prisoner, and, the difference between a political prisoner and an actual prisoner is a political prisoner hasn't actually broken laws, but they are an enemy of the government. Generally, it's the government that's breaking the law, and therefore they put people in prison illegally who maybe are trying to, hold the government accountable or call attention to what the government has done. And so that's the situation with my dad. And, of course, the government controls the courts. And if they don't want to let my father out of jail, well, he's going to stay in jail. But he has just filed his own appeal, and he's going to be adding to it. But he sent me a copy of it, and we're going to be posting it up on the website for Schiff Radio. We'll post it up on my Facebook page. So you can sign up there if you're not following me on Facebook, like me on Facebook. It's not that long. It's maybe about 15 or 16 pages. So you can read the whole thing. You can skim through it. But basically, the point that my dad is making about his trial is, the fraud that was involved. The government didn't actually have any witnesses that testified that my father committed fraud. I mean, that's what he was charged with, a tax evasion, right? Knowing that you have a tax liability and then deliberately not paying your taxes. It's not, he wasn't charged just with not paying taxes, right? It's not paying taxes, believing that you had a tax liability, and which my father did not. But they didn't have any witnesses that testified that they thought my father was insincere. They didn't have any evidence to suggest that. In fact, they didn't even try to contradict anything that he said. They didn't even try to disprove any of the reasons that he gave for why he filed the returns that he did and why he didn't pay any taxes. The government didn't put on one witness. The government didn't put on any evidence to otherwise impugn anything that my father said. They just let the judge do that. The judge just basically told the jury everything Mr. Schiff said was wrong, convict him. That's basically what happened, right? And who sits on the jury of a case involving a tax protester? Nobody who's ever been audited. Most people don't even pay taxes. They won't even let you on a jury for a tax case if you've been audited. It's like jury tampering. But who do they have on the jury? People on welfare, people on Social Security, people on disability. And what do they say? If you let Irwin Schiff go, you're not going to get your Social Security check. So you better put him in jail. Otherwise, the check's going to stop. Check's going to bounce. That's basically what they do. Now, my father, when he filed, and if you read this in his motion, when he filed returns, he wrote zero for his income, zero income. But now, why did he do that? He told the government why he was doing that when he filed his return. He said he was doing that in pursuant to several Supreme Court cases, which he cited, where the Supreme Court defined income as a corporate profit. And that's the only way it's been defined. According to the Supreme Court, individuals cannot have taxable income because they can't earn a profit. Now, the government said, well, those cases are, 80 years old. It doesn't matter how old they are, or they're valid. They haven't been overturned. You can shepherdize those cases, which means you can look and see if any Supreme Court cases have reversed those cases. They haven't been reversed. They're good law, and my father cites them. But, you think, well, why is it that individuals don't have taxable income? And I'll explain it briefly again. I've done it in my book. But the original income tax was declared unconstitutional because it wasn't apportioned, right? Because all direct taxes have to be apportioned. That's another reason why Obamacare is illegal. But the court looked the other way. It's a direct tax. It has to be apportioned. It's not. The court makes believe it's not a direct tax, but of course it is. If you pay the tax directly to the government, it's a direct tax. So the first income tax was declared unconstitutional because it was direct tax and it wasn't apportioned. So they passed the 16th Amendment. then the government, and the 16th Amendment says, or reads, that the government can tax income without regard to apportionment. Well, then the Supreme Court ruled what that meant. And the Supreme Court said, well, if the government can tax income without apportionment, then it has to tax it as an excise tax, as an indirect tax. Because if it's a direct tax, it has to be apportioned. So the only way the government can tax income without apportionment and still be constitutional, even with the 16th Amendment, is if it taxes income as an indirect tax, as an excise. And so how do they do that? And so what the Supreme Court said is that income has to be separated from its source before it can be taxed. Because a tax on the source of income is a direct tax, or a tax on income is the same thing as a tax on the source of that income. So the Supreme Court says that the government cannot tax rents, because a tax on rents is like a direct tax on the real estate, the property that produced the rents. The government cannot tax a dividend, because that's like a direct tax on the stock. The government cannot tax your wages, because that's a direct tax on your labor, on the individual who worked. What the government says is the government can tax the income derived from those sources, right? So they can't tax rents, they can't tax dividends, they can't tax wages. But if you derive a profit, which is what the word they use for income, if you derive a profit from those sources, the government can tax that only once it's separated from its source. And the only way you do that is through a corporate balance sheet. Because a corporation can have rents, a corporation can earn dividends, it can earn fees, it can earn commissions, it can earn all this stuff, but it only pays taxes on that if it produces a profit. That's why if you look up the definition of income in the Internal Revenue Code, Section 61, which doesn't even define income, it defines gross income, it doesn't mention wages. It mentions fees, commissions, because that's what corporations can earn. The word wages isn't in there because a corporation doesn't earn a wage. And that's the only place in the Internal Revenue Code where they define gross income. There is nowhere in that code where they define income, because the Supreme Court defined income. In fact, the Supreme Court said that income cannot be defined by Congress. It can only be defined by the Supreme Court, because otherwise Congress could amend the Constitution by changing the definition of income. So the court said that income has to be defined by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court defined it as a corporate profit. Now, my father believes that. He wrote that on his tax return. Here's the thing. When my father testified about that belief in Congress, nobody cross-examined him. The government didn't put on one witness to cross-examine him on that belief. They didn't put on any evidence to contradict that belief. When my father tried to cross-examine government witnesses with respect to that, the government objected, and the court sustained. So my father was not allowed to ask any government witness about any of those court cases, about income, about direct taxes, indirect taxes, about wages, or whether they're income. My father couldn't ask one question about it. All that happens is the judge simply tells the jury everything that Mr. Schiff said is wrong, therefore he needs to go to jail. And of course, even if he is wrong, even if everything my father said was wrong, that's not a crime. It's not a crime to be wrong. You have to lie. You have to commit fraud. And again, not only did they not have any evidence they didn't have any evidence to prove that he was wrong on his beliefs. They didn't have any evidence that he didn't believe his beliefs. There was no evidence that he wasn't sincere. So even if the judge instructs the jury that he was wrong, he still should have been not guilty. So read his brief. A lot of it is summarized there. And remember, he wrote that himself in jail at 86. He's sick and he's basically blind. He can't even see what he's doing. And so he has to dictate, and he has to have other people in the prison type it in. They don't even have a computer. They have to work on a typewriter, right? They have no word processor in the prison. So it's very difficult conditions to represent yourself when you're an 86-year-old man who can barely see. But anyway, he still did a pretty good job of writing it. 855-4SHIFT, that's our phone number. We got one more segment and before our guest, so we'll be right back.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Peter Schiff School of Advanced Economics. Twice the education of a Harvard MBA. For 1/168,000th the cost.
As a program note, I will be a guest Section 61, just to read you a little bit of it, because, when you ask the IRS, where is income defined in the Internal Revenue Code, they'll tell you Section 61. That's the only place they can point to, but it doesn't define income. Here's what it says. General definition, except as otherwise provided in this subtitle, gross income means all income from whatever source derived. Well, but what does income mean? See, they tell you what gross income means. Gross income is all income, but you can't define income as, you can't say income is all income, because, what's income? If I say, well, what is it, how do I define a large dog? Well, it's a small dog, only bigger. All right, well, but what's a dog? You have to define that term. So if, you need to define income before you can define gross income, but they don't define income anywhere, right? So the Supreme Court defined income, and it defined it to mean a corporate profit. It didn't define it to mean wages or salaries or stuff like that. And so that's the point my dad was making when he filed his return, in which he reported zero income, because he had zero income the way the courts define it for the purpose of income taxation. But the government, of course, ignores his arguments, ignores the Supreme Court, ignores the Internal Revenue Code, and just says, hey, you had income because we say you had income, and since you didn't pay income taxes, then you got to go to jail. And that's basically where he is right now at the age of 86. Anyway, you can read what he wrote. There's anything you can do about it. I don't know. He wants people to write their congressman or do something, make some noise, write the judge to maybe let him out of jail, because it's very difficult to get out of jail through the legal framework, because, the rules are so stacked against you when you're, in jail for political reasons, not because you're a threat to the public, but because you're a threat to the government, even if the government is the threat to the public. And my father is trying to protect the public from the government. That's what the government fears. They couldn't care less if they let a real criminal loose, because a real criminal isn't a danger to the government. But a patriot, somebody who believes in the rule of law and the Constitution, that individual is a threat to the government, and that's why the government wants to lock them up, to neutralize the threat and to make an example, to say, hey, you want to protest taxes like Irwin Schiff, you're going to end up in jail. So pay your taxes, be a good Nazi. That's what they want. Let me go to Jim. He's on the phone.